All right. Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. We're finishing up our first week of the senior side. And yeah, like I said, these 2 weeks in my mind are just the two hardest weeks as far as like getting like new content, having to retain it, build upon it. So congrats on making it this far. And next week we'll kind of continue with that flow. Um, just on a programming note, I know I mentioned this probably on Monday, is that next week I'm out on a kind of a pre-planned vacation. So Geraldo will be he'll be subbing in and teaching the class next week. So I'll make sure that he's up to date with everything. And he's been with LearningFuze for a bit. He's a evening instructor, and so he's familiar with the curriculum and all that. And yeah, so he'll be the new face you'll see on Monday morning, just for the week. So today we are going to walk through phase one and phase two of rotating banner, or not rotating banner, multiple components, which is our rotating banner, and then we'll jump into React Search, which is a pretty lengthy full scoped exercise where you kind of walk through the three phases of creating a React app, where we have our design, state, then our functionality, responding to user events. And then if we do wrap up early, we'll have React validated input and stopwatch. I'm going to pass those out as kind of like bonus challenges for you to kind of like take on at your own pacing. Don't consider them extra weight of things you have to do, but they're there for as you have time to keep on working on building things out in React. So those are meant to be kind of like playgrounds for you to keep sharpening your skills. So yeah, we'll jump into things and what we'll do is I have the code set up to where it's basically accomplished what phase one is. And as we kind of like talk through this, if there's any component I'm talking about and you're kind of like, you want to ask a question or whatnot, definitely like raise a hand and we'll dive in a little bit deeper. So currently we can see in the browser kind of like that the output of what phase one should probably look like, right? We've got some sort of title, we've got a prev and a next button, and we got our indicators. And the current item should be lit up in some sort of color. So we'll look at this banner first, like how do we implement that? We passed in or we created a prop called item, and we gave it a value of items at index 0. And so something you probably would have done is, or what I might have done first, so I might have console.log um, items to see what that looks like in the rotating banner. Okay, it's this array of 6 things. If I want to show the first one, then that's, I'd probably confirm my work along the way. Like, okay, that's how I get aardvark. Next one, that's how I get the next item, which is Bengal. And so I'd probably like take that approach, log my values and whatnot. And so for our item prop, I would pass in basically a specific string. So in this case, I'm hard coding in before I even get to the state. I'm doing some hard coding to say I'm going to pass in um, the first string in items. So if we look at banner, I had to make sure that I was destructuring item. I had to make sure I was destructuring this prop. Um, banner props, the type is item is set to a string. Nothing new there. And I'm going to drop this in our off-topic channel after I walk through. So if there's anything that um, I scroll too fast or something whatnot, you'll be able to refer to that. And then basically in the H1, I'm evaluating the expression item, which, items at 0 is aardvark, items at 1 is Bengal, uh, and so on. Let me get rid of this console.log. We don't need that anymore. So any questions about that, just that first banner component? Eventually I'll walk through and we'll replace it with state. Sweet. The next two buttons, at this point, they're very empty, so I'll just kind of address them both at once, is we have a prev button component and a next button component. In the real world, you'd probably this would be like a singular button that would take a different label, and then you could pass in different event handlers. But for now, we'll start with the smooth path is a prev button and a next button. Each of those are currently only just rendering a JSX button element with the text next and the text prev. So we see that on here. Um, Any questions or thoughts on those? Sweet. And if I ever say something is straightforward, don't let that ever hinder y'all from asking a question because things are never straightforward necessarily. There's always like something to ask or question or wonder about. The big one, I think the really heavy lift for this exercise was how do we get the right amount of buttons, looking at the design, how do we get the right amount of buttons dynamically without like in indicators, because we see that there's six buttons, creating six buttons and hard coding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 into each of those. How do we do that dynamically versus just, in the JSX going, and I won't do this for all of them, zero, right? Um, and there's no harm like in the design phase when you're just like getting the JSX kind of set up of doing something like this. You can like do this to be like, okay, how is this starting to display in my page? Like that's not necessarily a bad thing to do, but we want to be dynamic. We want to be able to respond to um maybe there are six elements in our array, maybe there's 65 elements in our array. Because whether we are hitting a database somewhere and getting someone else's data, or we're hitting our own database, trying to count for what's in there, or maybe an item that just got added or removed or whatnot, we want our code to be able to respond to whatever data comes in. So the approach we took, and the teacher solution, and there's a few different ways you could tweak things and do them differently, is first we wanted to pass in, we need to get an idea of how many buttons do we want to create. So came up with this prop called count. You call it total buttons, you call it whatever you want, but count is a good human readable prop name. And how many buttons do we want to create? Well, the amount of items in our array. So items dot length. So if there's six in here, this will be count will be six. If there's two, count will be two. If there's 24, count will be 24 is what we're passing in to count. And then you didn't necessarily have to do current yet. So I'm going to remove that. And I'm going to remove current here. Let me just comment out style. So that should have this working. Oops. There you go. So you might have so basically our goal is to, pass in first step is how many buttons do we want to create. So you might have done that with count, passing in a certain number, the number of elements in our array. And then if you followed along with like the phase one suggestion, it suggested, making a variable called buttons and then having it set to an empty array. And then we're just looping through whatever the count is and creating a button for each one. So we're pushing in this button JSX with whatever this label might be. We to meet the spec of our design, we just pass in the value of I to get that correct 0 to whatever the length of our array is of animals. So that's an approach you could have taken, and that's the approach that's taken here. And I'll show you all a different approach real quick after that. So I just called this for loop buttons. Let I equal 0, I is less than count, I plus plus. And then for each iteration, as we're looping from 0 to whatever count is, into our for loops button array, we're pushing this JSX button element. And React's going to want a key, so we put a key on it for index. Also, yeah, I guess we'd use I. If we were passing in the whole element, then we could like pass in like the element because it's a string and have that be unique. But the key of I works great to make it unique. And then we're just rendering the value of that I. So that's going to help us meet the design specs of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So everything that we'd expect. But then we get into the tricky situation of how do we have the highlighted element that we're on, because aardvark is at element 0, And so we want to be able to track that and give it appropriate styling. So to do that, we would need to know like what is the current element that we're on because we have a count, but we don't have a way in indicators. So the issue is how does the indicators know where we are? And so that's where we decided to pass in current. And again, like we're hard coding now, we're saying current is 0 um, because we're looking at items at index 0. So it makes sense that we would say that current is 0. So let's destructure current. And then we can just use this logic. We can use the style prop. And again, with the style prop, remember we use these outer curly braces means we're going to evaluate some JavaScript. And the style prop is expecting an object. And so basically what we're trying to style is the background color. And what color do we want the background color to be? Be in the design specs, I want it to be the color blue if it's the current item. So I just ask if current, which is coming from that parent app, which is initial value of 0, is it strictly equal to I? Well, I in the very beginning is 0. So for our first button that we're creating, that's actually going to be a match. So we're going to set the background color to light blue. If it's not a match, like it will be for all the other buttons, we're going to give it a background color of white. Something I did on my end that you all probably don't need to do is my browser is in dark mode, so it automatically flips some of the colors on me. So I had to give the text a color of black. You probably won't need, or you, if you run into issues, if you jump off the starter code, you might run into some issues with your color. I haven't tested it like in like what your browser might look like. In mine, I have to implement that too, so it's not just a white text on a white background. Um, so any questions about how we are like dynamically, because I think that's really the hardest part of phase one is how do we dynamically create the right amount of buttons and get the right color on the element that's the current element.
Yeah, that was personally the part that I had the most trouble with, like being able to dynamically create the number of buttons. But
Yeah,
that approach makes sense.
yeah, sweet, awesome. Um, Another approach, and I'm gonna drop this in the off-topic channel when I drop the starter code, is we kind of gave an example of how to do that with a for loop. Um, oh, okay. We could probably just so there's another approach that we could have taken in that we could have passed in items, and now I see why they didn't do this. Another approach is that instead of passing in like the count, we could have passed in items, which is an array, and we could have mapped over an array and done a similar thing. Um, Let me add a comment. If we passed in items array. So let me demo this. I think it's worth doing. Like, let's say we weren't working with count, but we're passing in items. So I'm passing in that array of strings. I'm gonna get some TypeScript complaining. Or not. There you go. Tell me that items doesn't exist. That's fine. Make sure this is functional. So in this approach, what we're saying is like, okay, here's a variable buttons, and we're going to map over items, that array of strings, right? And the map method returns a new array. So we're creating a new array in which we have our current item as we're looping over your array of strings. So this is, the first string is aardvark and then Bengal and whatever. Um, but the key thing that we are actually going to need to use is not the item, but the index. But to get to the index using the map method, you have to have that first um, variable, that first parameter in there. And so we're naming the item even though we don't need to use it so that we can use index. And so we're basically in our new array that we're creating with the map method, we're inserting into it these buttons. with a key of index, the style of current equals index. So nothing new there. Or we're taking that current prop that was passed down from the parent, and we're asking if it's equal to that current index. So the index is where I'm mapping over things is going to be generated for us. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have a hit on that first one. Current 0 equals index 0 for the first button that we create, and we give it a color of light blue. Everything else, current of 0 won't match index of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So they get a background of white. Um, I would say people in the industry might tend to lean towards like doing the map method over the for loop method. Um, yeah, so I think that'd be my general thought is I think people would lean towards using the map versus the for loop. Um, but you could take either approach in this instance. Map method kind of builds on like what we learned earlier. So um, for loop works great because I think that's what we prescribed. So we can go, don't feel like you need to change anything, but I did want to demonstrate like if we did go with the map method, what might that look like? So I'm going to drop that in the starter code or in the off-topic channel. And let me update this. For loops. This was count. Make sure nothing broke. Sure enough. You're still telling, oh, I actually wonder if it's just taking a second to catch up. Well, there must be some little syntax in here because we aren't working. We aren't generating the buttons. For loop buttons, for loop buttons. Count as a number. Yeah, yeah, this could be a little group brainstorming project. I'm missing it with my eyes. We have an indicators component with a count prop. Oh, that's what it's telling us. We're trying to pass in items, um, which is that array of strings. So that's why it was giving us feedback. There we go. All right, we got everything back. I should have paused to give you all some time to try to troubleshoot it as well. Um, Sweet. So that's where we're at. So really now the next step, once you have that all like wired up, is just bringing in the state. Because right now, we're hard coding an index and a current into here, and we can do that with state. So const um, current index set current index equals use state, and we'll give it a value of 0. And then we'll just replace 0 with current index. And so now we just want to confirm functionality of our state. Aardvark, the first element in our array, shows up when the 0 button is indicated. Cool. So the next thing I would expect is that Bengal would be the next thing that would show up, and that the number 1 would be lit up if I change this to 1. So I see that. That's all good. Let's do 2, 3. Oops. And then let's do 5. And then let's do 6. And so hopefully that'll start to give you an indicator of like, okay, there will be something as I do handle this that if my state continues to grow, I need to make sure that I loop around to the beginning. But this is enough to know that your state is generally wired up correctly, that the banner is changing as expected, and the indicator buttons are changing as expected. So any thoughts or questions on how we just implemented the state right there? Sweet. So at this point, really, like the goal would be to like, okay, how do I implement the functionality to click on prev or next? And so what I'm going to do is really quick in phase three, I do want to highlight that there is going to be some hints for when you do write your function for the handle the next click and prev click in your indicator. There are some hints for some code that you might want to use in your function. So I'll let you kind of dive into that. But what we want to do first of all is the shared state of banner and indicators, right? Their nearest parent is this rotating banner. So we need to pass our function. If we want to update the state in rotating banner, we need to define our functions up here in rotating banner. Handle next click, handle prev click, and then handle, I'm going to call this on select because you're going to be, also need to have the functionality when you click on the button that indicates the indicator lights up that button and the text changes. So you'll have to have three functions that you write. And because we need to update the state that's in rotating banner, we need to define the functions at this level. So I'm going to go ahead and just hook up one of these with a console.log. That'll make sure that you all get on the right track. So function handle next click. And I'm just going to give this a console.log handle next click function fired. And then I'm going to pass that into our next button. So naming convention would start with on handle next click. So again, same name, but Pascal case, and we prefixed it with on. So just naming convention. React can work fine without doing that, but for other people reading our code, it's really important. Then we're going to pass in handle next click. So for next button, I'll go ahead and scroll down to there. And I need to destructure that on handle next click. Right, that is our prop name. And so we'll go ahead and create props for it. Type next button props equals on handle next click. And this is gonna just, it's gonna return void. It's not gonna return anything. So let me go ahead and hook that up. Next button props. And then we just want to make sure it's connected. Or I just want to make sure we're set up to do that. So when there's a click on the button, we'll go ahead and give this function definition. And let's see if it works. So if we click on next, we see handle next click function fired, right? So basically on the next button right here, we have this on click. So we're listening for a click on the button. And we're saying, what happens when you click on the button? Well, we want to run this function. What is this function? Well, it's a prop that came from the parent. So let's scroll up to the parent and find that function. Head on next click. And here you could just to see that this gives us the power of accessing the state, we could console.log current index. The goal of this exercise isn't to log the current index, but just to show that we have the power to access the state. We can log current index right there. Demonstrate power to access the state. So I'm going to drop this in the off-topic channel as like a starting point, launching point as you all wrap up phase 1 and 2 and then move on to phase 3. I will say that the big clue for phase three, sorry, is we're going to run into that issue where I demonstrated that if we change our state when we reach the number 6, that we're going to run into an issue. We got to figure out how to loop all the way back to the beginning and the logic to do that. So in the tips section of phase 3, there's some tips that will get you there. I would encourage trying to struggle for at least 20 minutes on that so that when you do run into kind of like the direction, it'll be like, yes, that's what I was missing. So yeah, with that said, any thoughts or questions? Sweet. Well, go ahead, dive in. What we'll do is we have break 10:30 to 10:55, and then at 11, we'll go ahead and walk through this. So that'll give you at least an hour to kind of like tidy up phase one and phase two, get started on phase three, and then we'll do a walkthrough of the final functionality on phase three at 11 o'clock. So yeah, reach out if you have any questions along the way, though. All right, hey everyone, let's go ahead and gather back together, and we're gonna um, finish working through phase three of this exercise, and then we'll take a preview of React Search. Uh, make sure we're all set up, getting started on that exercise that'll come up after this. We'll go ahead and give Trey another second. There we go. Awesome. Cool. Let's jump into things. So where we left off was we had kind of hooked up our handle next click to when we clicked on next, we were getting a little console log going. But uh, before walking through that, before walking the solution code for that, I'm gonna go ahead and walk through the actual handle prev click um, function. And just to note, we've defined the function right here, and we'll talk about that in a second. On the handle prev click, or so on the prev button component, we have this on handle prev click prop, and we're passing in our event handler, handle prev click. So we're passing in this function. So that way, when we look at prev button, we are taking in that on handle prev click from the props. And so when someone clicks on our button, we call on handle prev click, which is this function above. And so in this function above, we are taking whatever the current index is. So in this case, if we were to, console.log current index, we save our code. When our app first loads up, our current index is 0, right? Which is what we'd expect. So if the state of current index is greater than 0, we would go into this code block here. But because it's not, we're going to go into this else statement. So we're going to set current index to whatever items.length is. And so this is going to be dynamic. We know in this case that items.length is 6 because there's 6 elements in our array. So 6 minus 1 is 5. So that means we are going to set current index to 5. So we're going to call set current index with 5. That's going to change the value of current index to a value of 5. So let's go ahead and we'll click prev. And we can see that we're logging current index is in fact 5. And then that means we're passing in current index to our indicator buttons as the current. In the case where current index is greater than 0, right? So in this case, it's 5. If we are to click prev again, we're going to run our logic. 5 is greater than 0. So now we go into this code block, and we're going to call current index minus 1. So we're going to call set current index with the value of 4. So we'll click prev, and we see that current index is 4. So this logic is very similar to our React events exercise, the way we handled the if-else logic. I did want to walk through the hint, though. The hint for the prev button says to do something like this. Without any conditional logic, we could just say set current index And we got make sure we got the right names, current index. And we'll demonstrate that this works first, and then we will talk through the logic of it. So let me refresh this. Current index will go back to 0. Click prev. We get that same functionality. So let's talk about what this line of code is doing. Both of these approaches are valid and appropriate. One of them has maybe more lines of code that you're reading, while the other has less. But you could also possibly argue that one is more human readable than the more concise one. So there's trade-offs. The way this is working is we are dealing with the issue of sorry, just a moment, let me clear that out. So we're dealing with the issue that we want to make sure that when we click prev on the first element that we go to number 5, right? And we don't just because there's no -1, -2, -3 in our index. So we need to address that. If we just did current index -1, then we would run into let's save this. This is the issue. So we run into previous index keeps on decreasing in value, and we're not getting the functionality we want. So this is a way of solving that problem. Oops. We take whatever current index is, and so this is disconnected from our code base in the console right here. So we're not working with any data in here, but we can kind of mimic what's happening. If the user is at refresh this so it doesn't look broke anymore. If our app starts with a current index value of 0, so let me copy this. 0, and we know our item's length is 6. Then we get this result. So this basically reassigns the value of 5 is what we call set current index width. So the way the logic is working is we're taking whatever the current index is. So think of the situation where it's 0, and we're subtracting 1. So at that point it's -1, and then we're adding on items.length, which is 6. So that gives us a 5. Actually, here, let me. There we go. So 0 -1 plus 6 is going to give us a value of 5. And then we do a modulo, and the modulo operator is going to give us the remainder. So if we try to imagine, say, I have 5 pieces of candy and I want to divide it evenly among 6 kids, I can't, right? So the remainder is 5 because I couldn't evenly pass it in. So that's how it gets us back to that value. When we are at 5, so in this next scenario, 5 -1 plus 6. So again, this is when we're sitting right here on this indicator. 5 -1 is 4, plus the length of our array, which is 6. 5 -1 is 4, plus 6. Yeah, my brain is just working really slow with this cold. Is 10, and 10 modulo 6 is if I have 10 pieces of candy and 6 kids, I can give each of them 1 piece of candy. So 10 pieces of candy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 10 minus 6 is 4. And that's how we get that value of 4. And then when index is 4, and we do the same logic, 4 -1 plus 6, remainder 6, it's going to be, this is a value of 9, 9 pieces of candy, 6 kids. I give each one of them a piece of candy, and I have three left over. So that gets us a value of three. So what's easier? For me, if I was looking to solve a problem quickly, I might write this code. If I was maybe I've seen this problem a bunch of times or this scenario a bunch of times, I might write this code below. There's not necessarily a wrong answer. You might find yourself on a team where, as a junior developer, you're like, oh, okay, I solved it. And a senior developer might be like, okay, cool. We run into this issue all the time. Let's write it like this. So there's not necessarily a right or wrong, but a team might have a preference. And I'll walk through the modulo operator again with a handle next click in that logic because it's a bit challenging. Even as I was going through it, I had to like knowing with the correct answer, I still had to kind of like talk through how it plays out. But yeah, any questions on that handle prev click function? The handle next click is actually a little bit more straightforward. Um, so cool. Let's refresh this, and we got the handle next click. Currently, we are just logging handle next click function fired and console.logging current index. And that was just to show us that we have the power to access state. So phase three, we could have taken this approach up here, completely fine, and nothing wrong with that. But if we were maybe looking to do something a little bit more succinct, if it's a problem maybe we've run into a number of times before, we might say set current index and pass in current index plus one equals items.length. Let's make sure that works. Awesome. So here's the logic. When current index is 0, which is where we're currently sitting, we add 1 to it. That's going to give us a number. So essentially, when someone clicks next, current index is going to, our first part of our equation is to come up with the number 1. And then we're going to do a modulo operator. And again, this just gives us the remainder. I have one piece of candy and 6 kids. How many pieces can I evenly give out? 0. So I have a remainder of 1. So we click next, and we got that value of 1 that this was sitting at. So now with 1, let's bring this up again. Our current index is 1. We add 1 to it. 2 pieces of candy, 6 kids. Again, same tragic scenario that none of them get any, but we have 2 left over. And so we keep on doing that till we get to a current index of 5. So 5 plus 1 is going to be 6. 6 pieces of candy and 6 kids. Good news, they all get a piece of candy, but the result is 0. So we call set current index with the value of 0. And that successfully returns us to the front of our array, or the first button. So definitely not something that you'd maybe intuitively think of, but good to kind of have that in the back of your head. And just like, again, just like still like more plugs for doing like those little logic puzzles on code wars and whatnot will help you as a developer. It'll help you read code and write code and come up with creative solutions. And you can even see how other people solve maybe a similar problem that you might have solved and like what made sense to you with the tools that you have. You might see like, oh, here's someone else, how they did it, and reverse engineer how they did it. Because when I looked at these solutions in the hints, I thought like, oh, I actually wouldn't have thought of doing that. I would have gone with the if else approach because that's kind of like what I know in this scenario. And so to have this other approach provided to me, it was like, okay, that's just a reminder. Okay, here's how the modulus operator can actually be a tool in scenarios like that. So I love seeing how other people approach things. Any thoughts on that before we talk about the setting up our indicator to be able to click on a certain button? Sweet. So our last one is handle select. So this one's going to be the logic is going to be more straightforward. the ability how we hook it to our buttons is um, or how we actually pass the value to our function is going to be a bit more complicated. But in general, handle select should just be function handle select. It should really just take an index because we know we're going to have access on these buttons. We know how we have an access to the index, and the index is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's exactly what we need. So that's the good news. So we'll just call set current index to whatever index is. So when this function gets called from the indicators component, the specific button you click on, that button is going to have a specific index, and we just pass that up. So the first thing I want to do is, let's go ahead and console.log um, handle select fired. So I'm gonna comment out this setter function right here, and I'm gonna pass it into our indicators. So naming convention on handle select seems like a decent name, and we'll pass in handle select. Right now, indicators is not expecting that. So on handle select. And what we'll see in a second is, remember, on handle select is going to it's going to expect a variable or a parameter or an argument is what I should say. There's going to need to be an argument. Index will be type number. And we're eventually going to, it's just letting us know that this line is commented out. So index is giving us some negative feedback. So we'll see in a second how we're going to have to update this props. Chances are you've already thought off the top of your head, it's um, we're going to need to make sure that it accepts an argument uh, for its index parameter of type number. But I'm gonna leave that missing, so just in case, so we can see what happens when that gets thrown. So now on each button, we're gonna have an on click. Let's do this right here, just so we can get the top equals, and let's no good adding it to our props if we're not gonna bring it in, right? So we'll destructure on handle select, and so on click, we'll call on handle select. So this isn't going to solve our problem yet, but we can see that our console.log is firing, right? So things are wired up. Again, when someone clicks on a button, we'll keep in note that we have access to the key of I. So we're gonna need that for updating the state of our current index. So that's awesome that we have that there. But when someone clicks on a button, we're listening for a click event, and we call on handle select. On handle select was a prop we received from our parent, and it's this handle select function that is logging handle select fired. So now the issue is we need to get the value of I, because we need that between 0 and 5 or 0 and 72, however many indexes there are. Sorry, we need to get that to this on handle select function. So this is illustrate kind of like a dilemma that we could run into, is that if we pass this in right now, or we need to pass in I, we need that argument, but this is going to invoke our handle select function right away. So we run into that dilemma. So what we need to do is we need to turn this into a function definition of itself. So now it's sitting here in a safe place saying, I'm not going to run until this specific button is clicked. If we tried to do it before, then we don't know which I that we're keeping track of. So that would be an issue. So now if we hover over I, we can see that there's an issue of we weren't expecting any arguments in the indicator props, but we do have an argument. So index type number. And that clears that up. I never set the typing on the prev click. I don't have to worry about that right now. Where is... Okay, so now we're all set. And what we can do is let's just console.log index from button clicked. So I'm not going to update the state yet. But this is the argument coming from the specific button we click on. And we get that 1, 2, 4, 5, 3, whatever we're clicking on. So it seems like that's linked up. We're getting that argument from the button that's being clicked on. So now we just set current index with whatever that index is. And now we got that functionality that we're working for. Prev goes back, next goes forward. And that, yeah, that walks us through the implementation of all the functionality. Any thoughts or questions on that? Sweet. Well, let's jump into the quiz questions. I know this is you both are still finishing this up, so if you don't haven't given thought to the answer, just take a second, think about the question for a moment, and then you're welcome to punt on it. Um, we'll go with Trey. What are the phases in the React design process?
So I basically just copied this from our thing here, but you start from a UI mockup.
Hmm.
So you create the static version to view the components, then you verify that it works before you implement it dynamically.
Yep.
The next one would be determine the UI state that will be in the components. So the state can only flow from a parent to child, and it flows as a prop. Then you add the calls to use state, and then verify the components work by hard coding the value to implement the changes yourself so you can see that it works. And then the next one is determine the events that are going to modify the state. So the event handler props, and then the props are declared in the child components using the on prefix. The props are declared in the child component. I'm sorry. And then the parents pass the handler functions to the props, and they use the prefix handle.
Hmm.
Then you declare the props in the child components and call the props. Implement the handler functions in the parent components and pass them to the props, and then verify everything works correctly in response to the events.
Yeah, awesome. And as you were answering that question, you literally answered like the next two questions as well. And so, good job, good job. You took some of the heat off of Ahmed. But yeah, yeah. So that's awesome. And so, as much as I know you said you're like reading what you wrote, as much as you can kind of like internalize that will be valuable. I know when I got into a job as a front end developer, my first job, oftentimes when I was working on something, I was like, I don't know like where to start. Like I'm trying to like work with isn't Ember JS, but I was trying to work with like the state of the component at the same time that I was building it. And I just was always just like in this, it felt like a bowl full of spaghetti, just like all just like wrapped up and pulling on one cord, messes something else up. And so I didn't have like a steady, like, hey, when I go into this, here's how I attack a problem. And so I think this will pay off over time, kind of keeping this in mind. And it's kind of like the foundation of how we've been approaching these bigger challenges all week. And it's also going into next week. We're going to do, I think, like 4 or 5 of these bigger challenges. So it's going to be that same approach of the UI, the state, and then setting up the events for that interactive part of things. So awesome, well done. Any last thoughts or questions? You guys will have time to. I'll drop this in the off-topic channel. You guys will have time to like wrap this up on your end as well. But I do want to give us a preview of the next exercise before lunch. But any quick follow-up questions or long follow-up questions? Well, yeah, Trey.
So I do have a question.
Hmm.
I I ended up typing some of this stuff into ChatGPT.
Uh-huh.
Say, what is this trying to ask for? Because I mean, if I'm being, I'm sorry,
Uh-huh.
you gave me your cold.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It happens.
If I mean, honestly, some of this stuff it was really hard for me to determine exactly what to do.
Uh-huh.
So I would type it in and say, what are they looking for me to do?
Uh-huh.
And of
Uh-huh.
course, it spit it out, you know,
Sure.
and you have to be careful not tell it not to give you answers because then it spoils it. But
Mhm.
um, I was just wondering, what's the best approach to try to break some of this stuff down so you can determine. I mean, you do it fantastic, but I'll be honest, when I read this on my own, I'm not breaking it down like you do. I don't have the insight, I guess.
Sure.
So what can I do to help do that?
Yeah, no, that is a great, yeah, a great observation. Um, and some of the stuff it's because like I've been through this specific exercise like 4 or 5 times. So it feels very like natural to me, but it should feel very, if it feels very complex, it is very complex. Um, there is a fair amount that does require kind of like intuition, and that's easier for me having been around a little bit longer coding and also, being with this, curriculum. Like my intuition is usually like on just because I've been around it so much. Um, I would say one thing that we try to highlight and talk about like on the junior side is you really aren't meant to be able to do this by yourself. That the curriculum isn't written in such a way that you would just be like, oh, I naturally know how to do it. It's written in such a way that yes, assistance will be needed from the instructor. So I think it's fine when you're like, okay, I am looking at this instruction and I'm trying to interpret what it's saying. That's totally fine. Like, and that's when you might reach out and ask a question. Like, I'm trying to interpret this, what this is asking me to do. And then I can offer clarification on that. And every student's going to vary and every exercise is going to vary in what feels clear and direct and what doesn't. So that feeling you have is normal. I would say it's also like I'd say like a fundamental, especially on the senior side. The junior side, in my experience, is very much step, 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 step. Like we kind of tell you exactly what to do. And the senior side, it's more open to like needing to figure it out and ask questions. So no, I don't have a magic pill answer other than to say definitely feel free to continue to like reach out to me. And that's why I'm here. And with a small class size like this, um, you can get a lot of interaction with your instructor. When typically, classes that are larger, it's hard to get that feedback, and you're just kind of like left saying like, okay, I'll just wait till the Q&A and then find out what happens. Versus we can have a lot more interactive back and forth. So I'll think on that answer though, and see if I can kind of get you a more precise feedback as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And I also let me just say this about AI. Like I'm glad you brought up, being careful about it not spitting out the answer because literally I think for just about any of these exercises, you could say I'm in a Vite application, here's my 2 files, complete this for me, and it'll do it in like 7 seconds, not even 7 seconds. However long it took you wrote it, it'll spit it out pretty much immediately. Um, so it's good to avoid, getting the answer spit out at you, but also like I use ChatGPT like all the time when I'm trying to figure out like, oh, I'm doing this, it's not working. Can you point out what the mistake is? So like I think it's a great tool. And sometimes in an exercise, I don't think it's wrong to say like, help me. And this is what I do with a lot of code is I might say like, help me understand this like I'm 5. And then if it's actually I'll say like help me understand if I'm like I'm 10. And oftentimes it'll be like even give me something too complex. I'll be like, well, help me, think of this as if I was 5 or something. And it'll kind of like break something down for me. So I'm all for tools like that. Just yeah, like you mentioned, just avoiding it giving answers. But a lot of times they're great for clarification. When I'm working on other things and I don't understand what I'm supposed to do next, I'll interact with an AI, and oftentimes I'll get some really good clarifying feedback that can be like customized to like my exact question or confusion. So, um,
Yeah, the first time I tried it, it gave me the complete answer and I didn't learn a thing. So I end up
yeah,
just saying, will you give me a tip on how to begin? And it'll give you a hint.
yeah,
So a
yeah, that's
hint or a
great.
tip, that's usually the best way I do it.
Yep. Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, and that's part of why, like in the prep course, why we don't have admittance tests anymore because people can just plug it into an AI and it spits out the answer. The only issue is that after you finish the program, you can't get hired by anyone because you don't know how to code. So like it comes back to haunt you. But it's a great it could be a great tutor. It can be a great assistant. So I'm not down on that at all. As long as we're learning. Um, Sweet. So let me give you all just a preview of React Search. And I'd say like as long as you all are starting on this um, after lunch, you're in a good spot. Um, Take another 45 minutes or so to finish up phase three. React Search is we're basically going to build this interface right here, where we're going to have a search box, and then we're going to have a list of LI items, right? Some sort of unordered list of phrases. And the goal is that someone can type into a search box, which is going to be like an input, and as they type in words, we're not going to be case sensitive, but we're going to filter out anything that doesn't have the words. So any of these strings here that didn't have the word you get filtered out, and we only see the result. If there are no matches, and I feel like this design should actually have like YOUZ, where there would be no matches, to make that more clear. But if there's no matches, then we would have some sort of default phrase of no items match the filter. Um, so to get started, I just want to get us started with like the foundational setup for this without giving too much away. We'll go to um, our starter code. So React Search, you'll see, again, I use starter code loosely because there is no starter code. And then we will need to, first thing we do is we need to create a Vite TypeScript app. So I'm going to grab that command or have it off screen. And we're going to create our app, npm or cd, my app, npm I, npm run dev. I'm going to get that going. This exercise, like all the other ones, is going to kind of give you like a problem breakdown. And then after the problem breakdown, there's going to be kind of like more details of what to do. We don't have as descriptive of in the multiple components exercise where it's like do this, then do this. But this one is a little bit smaller in scope, so I think it should the direction should be a little bit more intuitive as you're building. Um, it'll need to have probably three components is what the general directions are saying to get started with. So I'm gonna get that started up. So in React Search, in my app, in source, we're gonna have three components: searchable list, .tsx, and export default searchable. Let's do that. And then return div text searchable list component. Oh, I should always know that when things look a little funky, it's because I forget that function keyword. And oh, and return, it said return. There we go, that's looking a little bit better. So if we look at this in Vite, refresh this. I'm not importing it into app. So in app, we'll have to do some cleanup. And we'll bring in searchable list. And we should see that reflected. The next thing we want to do is we can imagine that with our three components, one of them is going to be the searchable list that is going to wrap two other components, right? Just like our multiple pages had our, what do we call it? Our rotating banner, like it wrapped, banner, header, next, and prep button. We're going to have searchable list, and it's going to wrap two other components. It's going to wrap in a search bar component and an items component. So the search bar component is going to have your input, and your items component is going to display your items. But we're going to want to keep our state is going to be in their nearest ancestor, which is going to be, state for both user input, because we're going to want to capture what the user input is. And we're going to use that to filter what data we pass into items. So we'll basically, I'll just put this. Shared ancestor of search bar and items components. So that means we're going to need two other components just to kind of set us up. Function search bar. And let's make this a div. It says search bar. And then function items, I believe is what we are requesting that you call it. Div items. So I know that searchable list is being pulled into app, and so we're able to display it. So I'm gonna replace that with search bar, and then items. Okay. Now I need to think through what I'm doing wrong. Function search bar. Let's see, I'm sure I'm doing something silly here. Let me inspect the elements just to make sure the text isn't just like coming up black and that's why we're missing it.
Should it be a return statement within the
Oh
component?
yeah, thank you. Whew. Now hang on. Okay, so that is it. I'm just wondering, looking at the text editor, if I should have saw where that was coming from. Yeah. I would think that maybe in a React ecosystem that because this is capitalized, meaning it's a component, that it would have alerted me, but no mistake for my own. I can't blame anyone for my foolishness. Thank you, Ahmed. There they are. Awesome. Cool. So that'll be like your starter code. We have these two baby components just sitting inside of searchable list. So that way, if you all do send me like your code to troubleshoot, you can just send me this one file and it makes it a little bit easier for me to look at. The only other part of the setup where I want to make sure that we're kind of like all starting on the same page. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. Is we're going to have our state be in our searchable list file. Or do they recommend that we put it in app? Okay. Yeah, so it's recommending that we put it in app, which I guess that nothing wrong with that. So in app.tsx, we'll go ahead and bring this in. And you can use you can come up with your own list of quotes if you want this to be Star Wars, Dallas Cowboy quotes, whatever you want to do. You're welcome to do that. And we're going to go ahead and pass this list into searchable list. So we'll go ahead and just give this a list prop equals this quotes array. And then quotes is an array of strings, so we want to make sure that we address that. Type props equals list, which is a string array. And then I'm going to go ahead and just console.log list. Make sure that got in. All right, there they go. Cool. So this is like our initial starter code to kind of get you up and going. And I'm not going to go too much into this any further. Obviously, you'll think that search bar is going to need to have an input in there for user to be able to type. Items is going to need to display some sort of list that we're going to map over and create LIs for each of them instead of a UL. So kind of big picture thinking. We need to determine though, like how do we filter the list that we give to items? How do we filter that list? Because otherwise we're just going to pass in that whole array. And so somewhere in this parent, I would imagine you're going to create some states to capture the user input in the search bar. And then we're going to use that state that we've captured to call the filter method on our list. And that will affect what list you pass in, as we're kind of like thinking big picture. But for the first part, we'll go ahead and just start with like the UI. So begin there, just like everything, get your UI built, and then you can start to think through the logic of what happens when the state changes or the user input changes or whatnot. So yeah, going into lunch, let's work on putting a bow on the React multiple components exercise. Aim to get done by 12:30. If you're not done by 12:30, there's nothing wrong with that. Just shoot me a DM so I can get an idea of where both of you are at. Because I do want to make sure that we can finish searchable lists before the end of the day. Because I want to do probably 2 check-ins with searchable lists where I can kind of like demo. Okay, we got the UI up and running. Okay, let's get the state up and running. Okay, then let's come back again and get the events up and running. So yeah, 12:30, just shoot me an update where you all are at, and then I'll kind of let us know when I think that we should all switch to React Search no matter what, even if you are maybe still wrapping up. I'll give an official time at 1:30. So sweet. Dive in. Have a good lunch. We'll see you all on the other side of lunch. All right, hey everybody, we'll go ahead and come on back, and we are gonna walk through, what we'd probably think of as phase 1 and phase 2 of accomplishing our basically our searchable list component. And then I'll kind of touch on some thoughts for uh, phase 3, responding to user events and whatnot to actually make it be something that works in the browser. So I have made a little update to the starter code that we kind of like kicked off earlier with. So try this for you. Got a bunch of primetime quotes from Dion. I know he's not a lifetime Cowboy, but probably familiar with him. Or Niners or Braves. Got to a few teams. Sweet. So we got Dion quotes just to make it a little bit more fun. I just got these from the AI, so it gave me these. I didn't really look through them. Looks like they're pretty PG. I'm sure he's got some funnier stuff if I ask for funnier quotes, but took this route. So that is what we are. There's 15 of them. There's 15 of them being passed into a searchable list. So we're logging all 15 of them. And now we'll work on just kind of like building out these 2 components. For the design specs of the search bar, I should have mentioned this earlier, so if anyone's like banging their head over anything, I'm not too worried about you getting the magnifying glass inside of an input. It's not my concern for this sort of exercise. We basically just want an input. And for phase one and phase two, this is pretty much all we need. You can work on styling it, giving it rounded borders, etc. I'm not too worried about that. The design specs, whether these order list these list items, whether they're centered, because I think they're gonna be centered by default. Um, as you'll have do you have like free time, you can definitely like clean these up quite a bit and try to be more precise. But I don't want to get too caught up on styling when we're really trying to get a feel for how data flows through a React app. So the search bar is pretty straightforward. Just that initial UI for it, at least. Later on, that's where we're going to be handling, user interaction to update state. So there'll be some complexity there. And then for items, um, the way I did this is, I just set up a UL, and I could have done a variable up above where I return the JSX and create my LIs there, but it's pretty short, so I'm just going to do this right here. So we use our curly braces, and so just like that's always a reminder that when we're in JSX and we're using curly braces, it means we're going to do evaluate JavaScript expression. It gives us that power. So we can hang on a second before I do that. We need to make sure that we're passing in this list, which we're eventually going to modify what this list is, because if we just pass in the list as it is, we're never really going to be able to like filter it. For now, I'm going to go ahead and pass in this list, and I'll set up a prop type items props equals list, which is going to be an array of strings. So now let's go ahead and destructure this list and give it a type of items props. Cool. So good. So far so good. So console.log, I want to say list from items component. Just because we're going to see duplicates, so we want to make sure that it's getting into the component where we're going to use it. We have to do a little refresh. So I my nose is like a faucet. There it is. So list from items component. So we're getting that data where we want it. And so now ultimately we will need to filter it at some point. But we'll just go ahead and just make sure, we can generate our LIs. So we have a UL as a parent, and then we'll just go ahead and list.map. We can call each of these items in the list, or each of these elements in your list array an item. And then basically all I want to do is make them an LI. I'll give it a key of that item, which is essentially going to be that string. So those are probably going to be unique. I could have get the index from the map method and use that, but just for now, this satisfies what I need. And then we'll go ahead and what is that item? And maybe a better terminology for this list should have been like quotes, singular quotes. So there's room to argue about the terminology and whether there's better choices out there. But essentially, we got it. So we are mapping over all of our quotes and we're displaying them in our items component. We're eventually going to need to, we'll hard code the way we're going to filter these. And so could be a couple different ways that you might have thought of approaching of like, before I get into even get into using state, like how do I start to imitate that sense where the user is typing into here? How does that user input? What logic puzzle am I going to solve to take an array of items and essentially create a new array that only has like the filtered stuff that meets the qualifications of what we're looking for? So before I kind of like get into that and maybe one approach to doing that, any questions just about like this initial JSX? Sweet. So I think what I might do is ultimately there's just two things we could do. We could pass in the list into items, and then we could pass in eventually we could pass in whatever the user's input is, and it could be like um, you know, user value. So we could create a prop that gets that user value from this upper level, um, or user value. Yeah, we can just call it user value. So we could get that, and then we could do like our um, filter logic on list with user value if we were to destructure that in as well. So we could take that approach. We could do that filter logic inside of items, but I think we could do it in a less cloudy way by not passing in all these props and do our filter logic in the parent. Because in the parent is where we already have our list and it's where we're going to have our state. So I would probably just do that there. So that way I'm only passing in whatever this new filtered array is going to be and not having to pass in like two props and then do the logic later. So um, not that you couldn't have done that. So before we get state going, I'm just going to simulate user input. So const user input equals, I'm going to have it in empty array. Imagine a user typed this in the input and we captured it as state. So that's what we're doing. We're imagining that the user typed this into a keyboard and we captured it as state. And I'll eventually like put some values in here and we'll kind of like hard code see our filter in action. So then really our goal is like, I don't want to send this unedited list in. I want to send in a filtered list. So I would create a variable, call it, const filtered list. And then and this is just now it's like we got to solve a logic puzzle. What tools do we have at our disposal? How do we take an array of items and filter it based on um, some sort of value, such as a string? So this could be easily be something that you could spend, half hour on, 2 hours on. You might have to do some research. If you used an AI and you just described what you were trying to do, it could probably give you feedback. If you just said, here's what I'm trying to do. Can you suggest some methods that might be helpful? And you might get some direction there. But this is just not React-ish at all. This is just knowing how the filter method works and solving a problem. So we could take our list and call the filter method. And I'm just going to call this quote. So each item in our list is a quote. And basically what we want to do is we would just say whatever that quote is, um, we want to check and see if it includes. So the includes method is going to check and see if an argument, in this case, user input, if our word, our string includes this substring, then this is going to be a true statement. And we're going to find our way into our filtered list that we're building is essentially how that works. So just to kind of demo. So the string hello dot includes the string h. That's true, right? So that would be true. Hi, no, it doesn't include the string hi, so it's false. So we get filtered out. So looking at our quotes, the very first time we have a quote, it's this one. If you feel good, you look good. If you look good, or if you feel good, you look good. If you feel good, you play good. If you play good, they pay good, right? So true. So here, I'll put that in, make that a quote, dot includes, and does it includes, this might be a little bit misleading. An empty string is saying, basically, does this argument have anything that this doesn't have? No, there's nothing missing. So it's okay. So it's true. If it was you, it'd be true because there's the word you right here. However, if it was use, Y-O-U-Z, there is no Y-O-U-Z. So it would be false. So that would be filtered out and it wouldn't make it. So that's essentially how this logic is working. And so what we can do is, again, all the time, my recommendation is like before you try to make stuff functional in React, as much as you can, like log the data, right? Before you try to deal with like how a framework or library works. So my assumption is that if I console.log filter list, then I'll give that a title. And I'll leave the original list here. I'm gonna get rid of this extra console log so we're not too crowded. And we'll save our code. And so this is our original one being logged on line 6. And then our filtered list, here's our comment on line 11. It has all 15 things, which isn't surprising because user input is this empty string. So there's not going to be any sort of false value possible. If I change this to you, so again, before we do state, hard coding stuff, now we can see that has actually, the filter list has been reduced to 4 because only 4 of those strings include the word you. And then if we switch it to use, our filter list is an empty array. So you might have to, and this would be a great place where you would add logic if, list dot length equals 0, display, no matches or something like that. So that'd be a good spot where you would check that because that's part of our spec is to give feedback that no matches have occurred. So that is kind of like very hard coding the state. Fortunately for this exercise, to actually implement state is pretty straightforward. We just want to make sure that we're hooked into React's ecosystem. So const, I comment this out. User input, set user input equals, and then initially because no filtering has occurred when our app first loads. So user input, I have that same variable name. That's what I'm checking every quote for, is that includes user input. So when our app first loads, that state is an empty string, so everything is showing up. And then again, you can hard code. So I might change the state to you, save it. And I gotta make sure that I'm passing in. Sorry, we were just looking at the console log earlier, but I actually need to make sure that into items, we're passing this new filtered list array, because that's what we want to loop over. So we can see that you only produces strings that have the user input of you in them. So let me do an empty quote again to show that they're all there. And then we do you, we get reduced. However, let's see, let's do when. We see that happens a couple times, right? There's a couple matches. But what if we do lowercase when? Then we get an issue. There are a couple whens that started the sentence that were capitalized. So then you might need to go back and just think in your logic. Okay, so I need to make sure that if I want to be case insensitive, then I would just make sure that the quote is something like to lowercase, and that the user input we take to lowercase, or vice versa. You could do them both as to uppercase, and then you're always going to be compared the same casing of words. If you wanted to be case sensitive, then you wouldn't do that. If you didn't want a lowercase to match an uppercase. Sweet. So yeah, so I'll pause there for a second. We kind of implemented the hard coding functionality to see our filter in practice. Then we kind of like brought state into it, hard coded the state. Um, any questions or thoughts on that before we move on to like talking about how we might think about updating the actual user state from the search component. All right, so last thing, and maybe I'll just pause for a second. Do you all have any, let me clear out the use state. What do we think the actions might need to be? Because essentially user input's going to happen in this input box that's in our search bar. What should happen? Like any thoughts? What's going on in your mind?
I'm thinking like we add some like an on change event handler, something along those lines.
Okay, so you're saying, we should be listening for when someone types in an input, an on change, and a change event happens. So having an on change. Um, yeah, so we could just, um, console.log on change event fired. Yeah, so let's clear this up and let's start to type. And then, yeah, so we're capturing that event listener will capture user keystrokes. Awesome. So suppose we do get that data, or suppose we do capture like that user interaction. And this is just kind of like throw back to some of our previous exercises. How do we update the state? Because remember, search bar is it's a child of searchable list, so it doesn't have direct access to the state right now. If we console.logged user input, oops, let me learn how to spell. I think we're going to get an error once we start to type. Yeah, so user input is not defined. So we don't have access to this state user input because search bar is like it's a child of searchable list. So any thoughts on how we might address that? So let me ask this. If you remember from the multiple components exercise, um, the next and prev button, um, did we define their parents in the rotating banner component, or do we define their functions in the prev and next button components?
Is that as far as the handle, like handle
Yeah,
prev
yeah.
click button?
hmm
I
hmm
believe that was defined within the component itself, like the child component.
Yeah, they were yeah, so with those we define them in I'm not sure if you're referencing to the app versus the rotating banner, but we define them in the rotating banner component up above. So that way when they are fired, when they're called from a child that they're delegated to, then they have access to that parent state. So we define any sort of functions that we want to update the state at the same level where the state is. So because rotating banner had our state, we wanted our event handlers to be at that level. So we define them there, and then we pass them into the children on prev, on handle next, on handle select. So essentially, the challenge that's coming our way is because we want to update, let me clear out some of this. Because we want to update user input, we need to define a function that we pass down, let's say event handler function. Hmm. Actually, so I'm gonna say you can create define okay, so define an event handler function that we pass to um search bar. Alternatively, um pass set user input to search bar. So two approaches. You can just create an event handler right here, function handle change or something like that. And inside of function handle change, um, ultimately we have to have it just call this function set user input with whatever that user input is. Or we can alternatively, we can just pass right into search bar um, our set user input. So you can kind of do that directly. So it doesn't, this is a unique situation where all we have to do is pass that in because once that takes an argument and we call it, we update what user input is. And that will then cause our component to re-render and we'll do our filtered list and pass that into items. So I think this one is a little bit more succinct and quick to do. Although maybe working with like our older frame of reference, this might be what's more on your mind. But um, I don't want to give too much more thought or direction without kind of giving away the answer on that. Um, but yeah, I think make sure you do have the key ingredients of search bar that's going to fire if we have an on change event. And essentially, instead of logging, this should, you know, call your set user input function. Set user input function with e dot target dot value. So from the React Forms exercise, I'd review that as a little bit of a refresher. So let me copy this. I'm going to drop it in our off-topic channel for you all to build from here. And then we'll probably do kind of like a regather around 4:15 and walk through this functionality. But any thoughts or questions before I let you all dive back into it? Sweet. All right, go for it. I'll keep my eyes out in Slack if anything comes up. All right, hey everyone, let's go ahead and gather back, and we're going to walk through phase 3 of getting our searching functionality up and running. Let's see, I'll get rid of this commented out code right here. All right, let's go ahead and do this. So basically, the situation that we're in, just to kind of recap, is we got um, our filtered list kind of technique down, where we are able to take whatever that initial list is and filter it based on um, whether it includes some sort of specific user input coming from the state. And we're able to hard code that and see that is working. That now we're able to filter what our array of strings are, and we pass that into our items component, and then we just loop over that and display all that content. So we got that. And now we're kind of in the dilemma that the state is sitting in this parent searchable list, but the user is typing in the search bar component. So somehow we have to get the data from the search bar component to change the state in the parent. So in the search bar, we kind of talked about this already, is we're actually able to capture in that component, we're able to capture what the user input is. So if we were to console.log, not this long string, but e.target.value, I'm just gonna, you have to define what e is. Then we'll see that when we start to type A, B, C, D, E, F, G, G, that's comes next, we're able to capture that. Where the event took place, the target or the event object, the target where that event took place has a value, this input. So we're able to capture that. So what we need to do is be able to have some way of giving that data to the parent. And so the way that we've kind of been like thinking about this, and hopefully the thing that's becoming memorable is that if I want to change the state in the searchable list component, if that's where our state is setting, then that's where I need to write my function. Because if I write my function at this top level, then it means that I can change this state at this top level. So I have to write that function and pass it down to a child component that needs it. So that when the child component takes that function and does something with it, it will be able to affect the state. So I'll show you two different ways. One is has a little bit more extra steps, and the other one's a little bit more succinct. But we're used to kind of thinking of just defining an event handler function. So function handle change, and ultimately, how can we update user input? We've got the setter function right here. So ultimately, set user input needs to be called because that has the power to update our state. But set user input needs some sort of value, right? So it needs some sort of, so this is a parameter right here. So I'm just going to put value. It could be X. Well, let's do value. So it needs some sort of value. And that value we're gonna grab from or actually this is the argument, not a parameter. I'm sorry. Anything you pass into a setter is an argument. But the function that we're passing down, this handle change, this is the one that will have a parameter. So we're calling this parameter value, and then we're going to call set user input with whatever the value is that's passed into handle change when we call it in the child. We can rest assured that this is going to be a string that the user types in. And so for now, let's go ahead and just, I'll leave that for now. I don't want to jump straight to the answer. So actually, maybe I'll just comment this out. So let's just do a console.log handle change fires from parent component. And then let's to show that we have the power of state. We'll log what user input currently is, which is going to be an empty string. We're not changing anything, so we should expect to just see it an empty string. So because we've defined something here at the parent top level, we should have access to its state. So now we'll go ahead and pass it into a child, so a search bar, and just name a convention on handle change equals handle change. So we're passing in this function definition. We're gonna get some feedback that search bar isn't ready for a prop, first of all. On handle change, search bar props. Let's go ahead and define that. Type search bar props equals on handle change. Its type is going to be a function that returns a void, but it's going to take an argument, right? We talked about earlier that it's going to need some sort of value that's a string, or some sort of argument that's a string. So I'll just use value string. So now I should be able to just test. Does this function fire? So I might pass in on handle change. And let me refresh this. And so on a change event, when we type, oh boy, why didn't you fire? Handle change. Let me move that for a second. Okay, let's hold up on that. And change. There we go. Okay. Okay. So we have our onChange event, and then we have our function definition. So we kind of jumped ahead earlier because we have to show how we can like provide an argument later by having a function definition sitting there. So we have an onChange on our input, listening for a change event. And when that change event happens, when there's a change in the input, onHandle change fires, and that console.logs handle change fires from parent component. And the user input, this isn't super helpful, makes us feel like maybe it's not registering, and that's just because it's initially a value of an empty string. We're not doing anything to do updates yet. So let's have U beat that initial state. So now if we do some sort of input, we can see that U is being captured, that this handle change has access to our state. And so really at this point, now all we need to do is how do we update user input or with the set user input function? Now, I'm going to warn you, this isn't going to work right now. We're going to get an error, right? That's because handle change is looking for a value, right? So we need a value to be passed in. So we're kind of breaking at that point. And that's just where we have to refactor this because we saw a second ago that an on change, when it occurs in an input, there's an event that happens. So we gotta capture that event. And so with that event, we want to get e.target.value. We were logging that earlier. That's one of the first steps we started on when we kind of like started this little review right here. Is that e.target.value is going to take whatever's in the input, and we're going to pass it in as an argument for on handle change. And let's go ahead and take a look what that value is. So console.log value. So make sure that we're getting that. And let me take off this initial state of U. So we start to type and we can see that we are capturing that value. So basically in search bar, we are capturing the event that happens in the input. We're grabbing the value of what's in that input and we're passing it as an argument to onHandle change. OnHandle change is this event handler that we wrote that has access to the state, and it has access to the set user input. That's how we're going to update the state. So now if we just uncomment out set user input value, we get rid of these console.logs and refresh things. And now if we start to type, it just works. Use eliminates everything. So I will say that adding this, creating this event handler actually adds a little bit of a layer of complexity that we don't need. They can kind of like make things a little bit more confusing than they need to be. But any questions about just like that code and why it was written that sort of way? Sweet. So the faster approach to this, and I'll leave this in our I'll drop this in our channel as a reference, is let's get rid of this on-handle change. Get rid of that prop. We'll probably need a prop a little bit later. I'll have to think about it. So we'll just console.log. We'll get back to this state that when someone is just typing in the input, we're able to access that with e.target that value. Whenever there's an event that occurs in input, we've got the target property and the value on that target, and we can collect that with the onChange. So the secret to this exercise is that we already have everything we need. Set user input does that work for us. So we can just take set user input, right? This is as close as you can get to saying that we're in the same location as our state, because set user input literally is where we update our state. And so we have that superpower right there. So we can just say just, on input. So there's just a prop name. And what do we want to happen on input? We want to pass in this set user input. So we're taking this function that's up here at the level of our state, and we're passing it in to this prop. So let's go ahead. We're going to expect to see on input. Right there. And now we can just simply do on input. Because we know when a change event gives us e.target.value, which is this stuff right here. And so we just want to call, oops, I have to destructure that. Search bar props. And this is going to expect a string. So we characters. It's got to be a better name than that. A more succinct name. So if we refresh this, we start to type, boom, it starts to work. So and hopefully maybe that might have even felt more clear, because all we did is like, okay, I'm going to update the state, so I can grab the function that actually updates the state. I could pass it into where we want to use it. We want to use it in the search bar. So I pass it directly in. And then when we collect the value of the event where the target took place, we just pass that in as an argument for on input, which by definition, on input, if we go up the chain, is this set user input setter function. Any thoughts or questions on that? Cool. So the main things just to remember, and I know this is kind of like on repeat, is that when two items need to share like the same state or some sort of functionality related to the state. So search bar needs the state for the user input or whatnot. Items needs basically the state of what happens when we apply our state of user input to our filter list. Because they both need that same kind of data together. We have that state set in the parent. And any time you want to change the state in the parent from a child, you have to pass down your function, your event handler, or your setter function down to that child to be able to have the power to update what's happening with their parents, so to speak. And then right here, let's just go ahead while we're here. We can just have if list.length is equal to 0, then return no entries found or something like that. And so that pops up there when we hit a point of no matches. Cool. So that's all we got for this challenge. Going into this weekend, the way I would recommend spending your time is I have a couple exercises that I can throw out that kind of piggybacks on what we've done. One is the React validated input challenge. The other is a React stopwatch challenge. Um, and if either of you DM me and say like you want to take that on, let me know, and I'll definitely release that. Um, I do think probably like getting the fundamentals down is like super important. So in my mind, kind of like a better way to spend your time would be like find some exercises to review that were a struggle. So like if you're struggling with this concept of, well, we were just doing this exercise with like some of the functions from the parent, um, and or like the state is in the parent, how do you update that for the children? um, Hitting that React events exercise, doing that once, twice, three times, get it to sink in, and then finding other exercises that were like, I didn't really, we jammed through mutations I didn't fully understand, go back to it again. So I'd say take that approach. If there are exercises that were very confusing, uh, go through those again. And then my other approach would be if there wasn't a specific exercise, then just as all of these exercises have documentation, the official React docs, going through those, especially with their like little interactive challenges at the bottom of the page, I think would be a valuable way to spend your time. Um, yeah, and yeah. With that said, Gerardo will be in teaching on Monday. I let him know that we're ready to go on React Accordion, so he'll give the introduction to that, and then you'll have time to start the day working on React Accordion. And yeah, at the end of the week, it'll be like a pair programming exercise where we take code journal and we refactor a solution code of just like normal vanilla TypeScript and we convert it to a React app. It's pretty cool. And then a good portion of the week is going to be um, a good 50-50 mix of challenges and exercises from what I remember. So you'll kind of bounce back and forth. So it's a fun week. It's a hard week. Just like this week, it's probably you're gonna be keep on learning new principles. So it's definitely challenging. But if you can get through week 9, take a deep breath. Because I feel like week 10 slows down quite a bit as far as like that mental load of juggling a bunch of things at once. Um, so yeah, I'm probably gonna tune out today, just super duper sick, and we're all set for the weekend. But I will be here through 5 o'clock, so we're happy to talk with either of you about like how things are going, what's up. If you have any questions, um, don't hesitate to hit me up. We just don't have any more expected work that we'll have to check in today and do. So yeah, you guys have a good weekend and have a good week, and I'll see you back the 15th, the 24th of February. So we'll see you all then. Have a good time.